Are you an HR department of one, trying to figure out how to balance task and strategy while keeping up with changes in regulatory compliance? Do you need a fresh outlook on old topics? Then stop what you're doing, grab your coffee, and get ready to recharge. If you have people, you have problems to solve and things to do. Your host is Brenda, a 20-year human resource professional, ready to explore the HR industry with veterans of business and life with fresh eyes and new ideas. Learn about the rapidly evolving changes in employment law around the country, as well as new tactics to deploy and build engagement in your workforce. If you're looking to implement new practices to make your job easier in HR, then this podcast is for you.
Okay, folks, so we have got yet another epic interview that's about ready to take place. And I know it's going to be epic because we've already been laughing, which anytime I have a guest that comes on, we start laughing before we actually start recording. It's always a fun interview. So I'd like to welcome Adam Markel to the show, who is a keynote speaker, TED Talk trainer, author extraordinaire, and master of resilience.
Master of all things.
That's right. I'd say master of the universe, but that character has already been taken. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's a drag, don't you think?
Manage.
Man. All right. I'll just have to settle for this lesser accolades or whatever that you want to call it.
You're in a class all of your own.
My kids have told me that. My wife has told me that. So I'm tending to believe it.
Life is grand. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Yeah, it's great to be on your show. I'm thrilled that we get to spend time together. And as you said, to be able to laugh, is we're just getting to know each other and be able to chuckle a little bit. It's so important. Not only just about the connection, that we've got a good connection, but the fact that we're doing something for each other that's really healthy.
Yep, absolutely. And I love your shirt. For those of you who are just listening, it reads, "I am resilient." It's this black shirt with this white letters that says, "I am resilient." I love that. Do you wear that out often?
You know what? I do wear that out.
Yeah.
I have a number of T-shirts. We actually do a process with our corporate clients where we ask them to put their brand promise, or actually we ask their workforce, the people that are on the front lines, to actually put their brand promise on a T-shirt. And because so often the values, the mission statement, they kind of, those things get jumbled up. Yep. And to put it all into just a couple of words is really difficult. But and not only that, but to put it into a couple of words that your employees would actually love to walk around and display. Yeah. To walk around with your brand is pretty cool. So yeah, I've got one that says, "I love my life," which I can share with you later why I have a shirt that says, "I love my life." I have one that says, "I love my wife."
Even better. Smart man.
I'm married 31 years to my college sweetheart. We have
awesome.
4 beautiful, healthy kids that are all grown up and independent. And so
that's so cool.
I feel like the words that we say out loud are a prophecy for what shows up in our world.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
I want to put it right here. I'm as close to my heart as I can get it. The things that I most want to model and live, really.
That's awesome. So I have shirts that I wear out too. And matter of fact, I have them available on the website for both men and women. And for the women, it says, "Don't make me use my HR voice."
That's great.
And every time I wear it, I always have some woman at least once in the day that points it to me and laughs. And she's like, And then for the men, it's a little bit disguised. It's not on the front. It's actually on the back. It says, "Dude, ... don't make me use my HR voice."
That's killer.
It works. So, and it's kind of disguised because it has an American flag on the front that's inverted. So it kind of looks a little bit like a military shirt until you look at the back of it.
I feel like we should at some point pause and do like a wardrobe change. People that are watching this on YouTube, right? And I'll just go put on like my "Got Your Back" T-shirt, and then we'll move into "Got Your Back" mode. What does that mean?
That's awesome. I love that. Oh my gosh. Well, this is awesome. We're already off to quite a start. I love it. So So you wrote a book called Pivot. I know you got another book coming out, and your book Pivot came out a while ago, which really could not, I'm sure, has made a resurgence in today's world, which I think is fabulous.
Yeah, 2016, it came out. It was a big bestseller at that time. And the word pivot, it's interesting because that word was never really so well received. It didn't become a part of the lexicon. People didn't really want to start to use it, I think, because it implied that you made a mistake. In fact, pivoting,
Yes,
in many ways, like when I first came up with that word and term for the book, it was a basketball principle that I was looking at. You know, the fact that you can pivot. My dad played basketball. I always wanted to, wasn't really good, but there was this whole thing that when you pivot on one foot, as you're allowed to do legally in basketball, you're able to see the entire court.
yes.
You can pivot 360 degrees around and see more of what's happening on the court. So it's actually a very assertive way to deal with things that sometimes when you've stopped the dribble, you don't know what to do next kind of thing.
Right.
But the word pivot was also being used for Silicon Valley startups that failed, that the model didn't work, and they had to pivot and do one thing differently than they were, or something kind of drastically different. And YouTube being a great example, right? This is folks that are watching us on a platform that started out as a video dating site. Okay, so they had to pivot because the dating piece wasn't really working for them, I guess. But the video part was, and now it's this, obviously tremendously successful, prolific, multi-billion-dollar enterprise that had to pivot. So, but at the time that word was kind of seen in a negative light. And even though the book did really, really well on the topic of career transition, personal transformation and transition, it wasn't until the COVID crisis hit, this latest sort of thing, this major disruption, that word just started being used all the time, all over. I wish I was getting paid even a nickel for the number of times people have used the word pivot in the last 6 months.
How many people have sent you that blooper from the episode
video
from Friends?
Exactly, with
they're trying, Ross
is trying to get the couch around the corner.
Yeah, and he just is absolutely obnoxious with the word pivot.
You just want to strangle him right there. It's like pivot.
That was one of the best ones ever.
It was
great.
My
gosh.
Yeah.
And I love, there's something great about words like that, right? Because anytime I've talked about, communicating to your workforce and communicate about, what people see and what they take in, I always refer to like when you're flying in an airplane, right? So when you're flying at 5,000 feet, which is essentially what the view that your employees have of what's going on. They can see the street. They can see the details on the vehicles. They can see the pools, swimming pools in the backyards of the homes as the aircraft is flying through the air, right? But then you've got a CEO who's an individual that who has to see everything at 30,000 feet. They see the horizon. They see what's coming their way. They see the storms and the clouds rolling in, right? They can't be effective in doing what they do if they're only flying at 5,000 feet. And then your managers and your directors and your internal leaders, they're the ones that have to bounce between 10,000 feet and 15 to 25,000 feet. Right. And they're constantly going up and down. Right, exactly. So they're constantly having to shift their vision and shift their mode of communication to match based off of that. So these are awesome. I love these visual analogies because it's
a great analogy. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you also have to be able to have an instrument panel that you can fly by, because we know that there's two kinds of sort of rating or certification when it comes to flying. One is visual. Yep. That you're certified to fly visually, and if you're in clouds or fog or anything, you're not allowed to fly because you're not VFR rated. You're only VFR. You're not IFR, which is instrument rated, and those are very different skill sets.
Absolutely.
So you've got to have an instrument panel, and you've got to have data and information and things that are on the instrument panel that give you the ability to make those decisions about where to fly. Otherwise, you end up kind of knows first. And I think you're right. There's a number of different skills that are sort of happening simultaneously there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that if you're not certified, you will nosedive. But that's the thing. And a lot of people are out there leading companies and leading organizations, and not that they need to be certified, but they're not. And they don't have that mindset of, being able to pivot and to turn and see a full 360 degrees. They don't have that mindset to understand that maybe I do need to drop down to 15,000 feet and look more internally at the organization versus just staying up here. Then you have those leaders that, man, they're in the stratosphere. I mean, they're just up there, but we're not going to go there, right? You can't get them back down to orbit. It's just as simple as that.
We had a name for that when we were kids, right? It was called the Space Cadet. I mean, I'm a little older than you, but just remember that
I would challenge you on that one. I bet you we're about the same age.
Yes.
If you remember Rhinestone Cowboy and the majority of the words to it, we're about the same age.
Okay, fair enough.
Fair enough.
Fair enough.
That'll work.
Just don't make me sing it. I mean,
I won't know.
Glenn Campbell, I am not.
I'm going to have it in my head all day now. Oh my gosh. But so one of the things that I think is great about you, and I think what, I think the audience would appreciate hearing, because we've talked about it many times, and that is the relationship between the HR and the CEO. And you've been a CEO of your company, and what really is necessary and needed as we have had to shift and continuing to shift, because honestly, nobody knows what to expect. Nobody can predict anything right now. We know that the election is going to come to an end. That's about the only, and New Year's is on the horizon, right? Those are kind of like the only things.
I will say, so right now we're living in a time of great uncertainty, which I think historically, if you go back to any point in time, whether it was the late 60s or was the late 70s or the early 90s when the S&L bank crisis was happening, or 2001 we had 9/11, or 2008, there's always been these sort of epic events, or these events that have created great uncertainty and anxiety in the population. I think what's really important is that we learn how to utilize uncertainty. The book that I've got coming out in the spring is called Change Proof: Leveraging the Power of Uncertainty to Build Long-Term Success. And really that's what great leaders are able to do. They are able to find the opportunity in uncertainty to grow. The opportunity that exists in uncertainty to grow personally, to grow as an organization, to grow as a leader, all those things. And ultimately, I find that doing that is one of those things that contributes to whether a person or an organization is resilient. Yep. Resilience is the number one skill, as far as I'm concerned. It is a tangible, usable skill. It is not a soft, even if it is considered a soft skill, it is not just the most important soft skill. I think it's the most important skill that any individual or any leader can create, can model, can train and teach, because ultimately that organization is a reflection of the values that are most closely held by that top, the CEO, and by the leadership, the senior leadership of that organization. Everybody else is going to take their cues from those leaders. They're all going to model what they see in those individuals, or they will reject what they see. And so to me, when you work from those levels at modeling how to become more resilient, you ultimately end up with a resilient company. Yeah. Meaning that the culture of the company is one that is routinely able to utilize uncertainty, is able to embrace change, is able to self-disrupt, is able to not only stand back up after being disrupted or knocked down, but is able to create momentum out of situations that other people are just sort of reeling from. McKinsey did a study of companies that came out of the 2008 financial crisis, and they found that there were two different kinds of companies: those that were resilient and those that weren't. And the ones that weren't, sometimes they failed entirely. Often they didn't fail entirely, but kept going along, kept, sort of surviving. And that was their culture. We survive. And then there were the resilient companies that were thriving, that bounced back and continued to increase the distance or the gap between themselves and their nearest competition, because they were, in fact, resilient organizations. We could dive into what makes up a resilient organization or a resilient individual. We can do that. We could talk about how it is that we assess it, and also how it is that you, whether it can actually be trained or whether you're just born with it. Because I think a lot of people also believe, erroneously, I guess, as I'm giving it away, that you're just born that way.
Yeah.
Somebody's just a bit more resilient than somebody else. And that's just not what the research says.
No, I would agree with that, because your worldview is what helps formulate you into who you are and how you address the world. So that's the same thing with resiliency. If you're an individual, and I won't steal your thunder, but this is just my opinion, that if you're an individual who can gracefully take, life's smacks in the chops, stand up, dust yourself off, and just get after it, you have a higher level of resiliency over an individual who will sit there and, I want to say, fall victim to the chatter in their head. And that is,
1,000%.
yeah. So,
yeah. And that's the chatter in the head piece is actually the first trait. If you look at resilience versus non-resilience or less resilient, it's the chatter in the head piece. So the first step and that first trait we look for are individuals that know how to reframe.
yeah,
They can reframe situation. Look at a situation. Two people look at it. One person says, "Oh, I wouldn't have loved that to happen, but I'm okay." And not only am I okay, but actually I think I'm going to be pretty good.
yeah.
In fact, not only am I going to be pretty good, but a lot of other people, they might not be so good. So I might actually be better than I even think that I'm going to be. Versus someone else that's looking at that same situation and says, "This is terrible. This is a catastrophe. This is the end of my life. This is the end of my business. This is the end of my," and fill in the blank. Two individuals seeing the same thing, but making different meaning out of it. So the first component of resilience is that you are able to reframe that. Just so we're clear, this is not about putting on some false, set of rose-colored glasses
Sure.
and trying to, look at the lemonade instead of the lemons. It's really about taking a look at something and removing. So there's a process to reframe anything. The process is that you pause, you ask, and you choose. That's the process. So you pause means you stop and you remove any judgment about it. You just pause long enough to go, it doesn't have to be right or wrong. It doesn't have to be good or bad or true or false or fair or unfair, even like the pandemic. Just pause to just see it for what it is without making the meaning about it being good or bad, so that you can then ask. And you can ask questions about that thing. You can probe it. You can be an attorney and try to pick it apart, like you're conducting a deposition or a cross-examination in front of a jury, and say, does it really mean that my business is done? Does it mean that if my business is done, that means I'm done, or that my marriage is done, or that my ability to pay my mortgage is done, or any of the other things that were going on? You ask certain questions to dig deeper, because when you dig deeper, you find meaning, and that's what we're always able to learn from, is when we can extract meaning out of things. Like Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. We're always
incredible book.
Right, searching for meaning.
Yep, read that book many years ago.
Yeah, it's a life-altering book about a guy who is living in the most horrific conditions you could probably imagine.
Yep.
And not only survives that situation, but while he's in that concentration camp in World War II, seeing people be murdered all around him, he's thinking about how someday he's going to be able to teach people what he learned from this experience.
Yeah.
That he derived his meaning therapy out of one of the most brutal and excruciating things you could ever go through as a human being. So we've got to be able to ask those better questions so that we can then choose, that we can make better choices. What is our life, Brenda, other than the product of the choices that we've made?
Totally. And I think a lot of people miss the opportunity Because I love what you said about when you look at a situation, you're like, I'm not, you don't make a judgment to it. And I know when I'm going through something, because it's like, I don't really know how I feel about this right now. And that's probably the best place that I could possibly be versus my knee-jerk reactions. And and I do that when I'm dealing with a lot of HR issues, and I'm dealing like with people issues, especially when I'm dealing with, if you have an employee that stepped out of bounds and has done something that is, abhorrent or really bad or atrocious, and or just even something mild where we just all of a sudden cast and we start attaching our judgment to the situation. And I've gotten to that point where I just remove myself and just like, okay, this isn't about me, but I also don't really know how I feel about it. I only know that I have to deal with the situation. I'm going to deal with how I feel about this a little bit later. And, I have my moments where I'm just like, oh my God, did they really just do that? Or did they just say that? But the thing is that with every situation that comes your way, you should be asking yourself one very important question. This is what I've done, and this is my advice to anybody. And that is, what am I learning from this? Because everything that comes your way in life is an opportunity to learn something.
It's so brilliant. I mean, it's almost like we're playing a game of catch here, because the choosing part has to do with this one particular thing that we want to choose, which is the opportunity. Choose the opportunity. So the question that we will, when we're presenting this material in a corporate setting or a workshop, I will always have the slide that says, and I'll talk about, what is the creative opportunity now? Because my wife always asks me that. And the moment something goes sideways, whether it's a marketing plan or it's this thing or that thing, and she said, well, so what's the creative opportunity? What's the creative opportunity now? And focusing on what the opportunity is so different than where you might focus on how you're a victim, or how something is unfair again, or how it is that this is kind of a catastrophe. We awfulize things all the time.
Oh, I love that. Awfulize. That's a great word.
It's a Albert Ellis term from like the mid 50s, this great psychiatrist at the time, who had something called he created something called rational emotive therapy, where he just basically talked about and wrote and lectured on the topic of how we make ourselves miserable.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's had some interesting case studies there, but that's very true. We just can't get out of our own way when it comes to that kind of thing. So, and you're absolutely right. I mean, humans we're not programmed to be Pinteresty, sunny side up all the time. We have to work at it. Our brains are just not wired to be positive. We're wired to be negative, and we will beat the living tar out of ourselves. Achievers will beat the living tar out of ourselves.
Oh, mercilessly.
Yes, absolutely.
And I suppose on some level, people that are successful, that realize that about themselves, like they have the self-awareness to realize that they are a perfectionist, or that they can almost never be fully satisfied with themselves. They don't love themselves unconditionally. They love themselves quite conditionally.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm one of those.
And when they have that self-awareness, it's super important, because therein is the seed of the opportunity right there. You go, okay, so that's the way I am. But it's also gotten me this far. And when I work with CEOs, often it's breaking that loop. I have to first deal with the barrier, the barbed wire of that's what got me here. And then we got to say, so the question is not what it is that got you here. Its question is, what's going to get you to the next level, or what's going to keep you here? Just because you're here doesn't mean you're going to stay here. So the question is, great, it got you here, or you're thinking that it got you here. Maybe there's some other things that got you here as well, or even things that were more important than that, sort of always holding the axe over your own head kind of thing.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And when you're in the field of HR, you have a very small circle to operate in. And it's either a circle that is compliance, because you have to figure out, okay, how do I balance the interest of the employee and the interest of the company? Or I'm dealing with something and I'm an HR person of one. This has now gone sideways, and holy crap, am I responsible for this? Oh, what am I going to do? And next thing you know it, that internal dialogue cues up.
Oh yeah.
And it's instantaneous and you can't control it. But once you hear it, you can wrangle it in.